I guess, start by saying welcome to the Freethinker Institute Tuesday night sessions, where we basically share ideas to help us in transformational personal and professional development. And tonight we're going to be a little bit on the interactive side because, like I said, there's not as much material to share, but it'll be more conversational. And I'm going to talk about two short essays that I wrote. One is like how to be the person that I want to be, and then in part, as part of that, is why I'm a realistic idealist and why you should be one too. And so I'm going to try to be convincing you that you should be a realistic idealist, not only a realist or an idealist, but both. I like to say regularly when I'm given multiple good choices, I like to choose both. So we'll basically have, people can ask questions like while I'm presenting. Feel free to ask clarifying questions about what I'm presenting, and then after like a section of presentation, I'll ask a thoughtful question prepared by Ellis and in conversations we had in preparation, and then there will be plenty of chances for people to speak up, and we encourage everyone to speak up. And yeah, I guess if anyone sees troll-like behavior, let us know, and we have a bunch of moderators ready to take action on that. And just want to say, like, the only rule of these sessions is to be polite. And so, everything else, like, we welcome all ideas and opinions. Let's just put them forth politely, because that's the best way to be well received and have your opinion be listened to carefully and thoughtfully. And I'm basically, my name's Garrett Lang. I'm hosting tonight and presenting. I'm the executive director of the Freethinker Institute, and we really want to try to add value to people's lives and look at acquiring wisdom and knowledge and putting that into practice in our daily lives. And we cover a wide range of topics, and so would love for people to join us on these Tuesday evenings. And Ellis will post some more information about the Freethinker Institute for people that want more information offline about past recordings of events. We do record these and put them up on YouTube, so that everybody's aware. That was in the advertisement as well. But for the sort of starting point, I want to kind of talk about, and I have multiple monitors here, so when I'm looking up in the corner, that's what's going on. But basically, I'm going to go ahead and go into the presentation. I guess basically the first part, and I kind of rearranged things a little bit, Ellis, so in the essay, but we'll see if I can sort of acquire or like stick to the questions that we had. So the first thing I want to talk about is basically, that I think it's important to be authentic, but also to be polite. Speaking of politeness, and so a lot of times you'll hear the common wisdom: don't let anyone change you, right? And I think that this is often sort of accepted without questioning, that no one should let me change me. And I think that it's really important to distinguish what does it mean to change someone, because I would argue that if someone is changing you to help you be a better person and to be more the person you want to be rather than the person you're being at that moment, isn't that a good thing? And so I guess, I've also heard people say, my authentic self is rude, and I don't actually believe that that's true. I don't think anyone's authentic self is rude. I think rudeness is generally comes from not maintaining like a calm state of mind and a calm temperament, and it's usually there's lots of things that could play into like why someone is rude, but I would just argue that that it's a good thing to try to combat actively, to not be rude, because when you're rude, people don't take you seriously or listen to you carefully. They're not open to your opinions or your ideas, and so always better to be polite. I would argue very few, if anyone, really aspires to be rude. They do it more out of lack of the sort of that we could go into the reasons people are later if people want to ask questions. But I would say the goal should be to actively aspire to be polite, and then, you know, if you are rude, you tend to, you know, shun the people that are going to help you grow the most in your life. So, you know, always better to be polite. That said, I think it's important to always be open to personal development. And so that's where I say, like, you know, when you say don't let people change you, I mean, part of what life is about is creating relationships with people who will help you be the best version of yourself, which is what I would argue is, you know, a really important thing to go after. And one of the goals of the Freethinker Institute is for us to, you know, for members to help each other be the best version of themselves, seek truth, and be fair. And I would argue that when someone is helping you do those things by giving you feedback, that will probably, you know, help you be a better version of yourself that you want to be. The things that I think we should not let people change about us is things like our positive hopes and aspirations for the future. You know, developing firm resolve towards being the best version of ourselves that we can be, seeking truth and being fair. And they shouldn't help us, you know, they shouldn't tell us that our goals aren't valid or important. As long as our goals are increasing happiness and decreasing harm net, then, you know, I don't think we should let people, you know, steer us away from our goals if we're excited about them. You know, if you're passionate about being a musician, like, you know, someone might say, well, you're not going to make a lot of money, but if you say, look, I'm passionate about being a musician, you know, that's what I want to do. You know, I would argue you shouldn't let someone steer you away from that, as long as you know that the chance, you know, sure, some musicians make a lot of money, but most don't. And if you're okay with that, but that's really where your passion is, yeah, don't let someone change that about you. But, you know, if you're rude to someone, or if I'm rude to someone, then I want my good friends to tell me, hey, Garrett, you were rude to this person. Like, this is a way that you could have said the same thing more politely, and they would have been more receptive to your feedback. And so that's kind of the first point that I want to make, is about, like, being your authentic self, but being polite and aspiring to be the best version of ourselves. So maybe we'll break there and just ask people, you know, what questions people have, or any comments on that. And I guess we had a question.
I can ask the question.
Yeah, please, Alice. Thank you.
So are you willing to be open and change when others make a suggestion you have not tried? And do you believe in accepting help from others, or do you prefer not allowing others to change you? Or anything else you want to talk about?
Anybody want to share?
I guess,
Go ahead, David.
I see a hand up here for Joe. But anyway, okay, all I was going to say is, I suppose anytime you have a conversation with somebody and you learn something, in effect, you could say they're changing you, or you could just say, I learned something new talking with that person, which is kind of the way I always think, well, I learned something new. I'm not sure when you say, well, I want to change myself to the best possible me. I don't know. I just think I like to learn. Personally, I guess I could say a better me would be somebody who knows more than I know at this point in time, I suppose, because I like learning stuff.
Yeah,
that's all I have to say.
No, I agree, David. And for me, like, the better me is learning. That is like the path to being the best version of ourselves, is through learning. We only become better through learning. And I would argue, you know, we can learn wisdom and we can learn knowledge. And why not surround ourselves with a community like this one that helps us acquire both, which is why I appreciate all of you, because, you know, I learn from all of you, and I hope we learn from each other. And that's, you know, for me, the purpose of life is learning, and being the best version of ourselves. So that said, I want to let Joe go next.
Yeah, for me, like, the same way, I agree with David that it cannot be answered like the question as it is, because it's kind of relative. Like, you don't really, like, you don't really go on changing someone or thinking that you could change someone for the better, because you really don't know that someone, something like that. So it's really not a conscious interaction. It's a developing interaction, mutually developing interaction for both. So in the like the same way as the rudeness is somehow relative, or it's you, your environment make you give you some rude behavior that could be taken as rude, or not. And at the same time, that's if you are the one that acting as rude or something. But then if you are on the receiving end, it's more on your judgment or misunderstanding of the action. So it's really, there's no absolute. And I guess it's in philosophy, it's like the questioning. There's really no, it's always questioning back and forth, and there's no one really get the idea, a concrete answer. You wouldn't know how the other person understand it, and that you wouldn't be sure whether you were understood by the other person exactly the way you want to be understood. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think Joe, philosophy often tries to not like say that there is no answer. I think there are often answers to questions. You know, whether the Earth is an oblate spheroid, there's an answer to that question. It's a knowledge question. So I think there are answers, and I think there are answers in social situations as well. And there are definitely degrees of, you talked about how like rudeness is depending on the perspective. There's definitely degrees of rudeness, and there are things that would be rude to one person and not another. But if you're given a context, I think that, you know, there is better and worse, and striving for better is good, I guess, is what
I think I get what you're saying. Like example, the question like, would you be letting someone change you?
Yeah.
So the answer to that is relative. Does that someone do you see that someone have the right like, is that someone really a better person, or do you see that person gonna change you for the better, or that someone is really, you see, rude, not to, something like that. It's
yeah. Sorry, Joe, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead and finish your thought. So yeah, I agree. And like, if they'll change you for the better, then I think it's worth listening to them. Quite frankly, even if they are rude, I think it's still worth listening to them. But yeah, I agree with you, Joe. Like we should listen to them with an open mind. And we had another session on feedback, giving and receiving feedback. And that's what we talked about, is listen with an open mind to everybody, even if they are rude, quite frankly, because some rude people do have good feedback, although most don't. Most of them are projecting their own negativity onto you with their rudeness, but still worth listening to. So that said, YD.
Yep, I pasted a comment in the chat, but doesn't it depend on what the individual values? Because some people value self-improvement while others value financial gain or other what people would consider good. So if people don't want to improve themselves, can you really reach them? Like, you can take the horse to the water, but can you make it drink? Or like,
yeah, I think we actually had another night where we talked about the purpose of life, and I tried to make a good case that it's in everybody's best interest to self-improve, because, you know, self-improving, even if your goals are financial, by being a better version of yourself, you're more likely to achieve those financial goals with positive relationships. You're more likely to have positive relationships if you improve yourself. If you're an antagonistic jerk, your chances of achieving financial success are much lower. Not saying no one's done it, some have, but your chances are definitely much higher. And they've actually done studies of the most successful people, and most of them are actually givers, people who give more to other people than they take. And so, yeah, so I do agree with you, YD. Like, it's important to, you know, consider that not everyone is coming from a place of already knowing that they need to self-improve in order to achieve their goals. I think the first step with those people is to like make the case for that. If you think they won't be open to it, and our conversation on giving and receiving feedback, which hopefully we have recorded, and if we don't, then we'll redo it, you know, sort of helps people open up to that kind of feedback. That said, Jeffrey.
Yeah, my thoughts on this is that change is inevitable. I can't think of the name, but there was a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher who said, you can't step in the same river twice. Because even when you try, the water's different, you're different. I mean,
Heraclitus.
I turned 40 this year.
Heraclitus, yeah.
Okay. I turned 40 this year, and I realized I'm a much different person than I was when I was 20. So I think the key is like, are you just passively accepting change, or are you kind of actively, like, I don't think you have to have everything planned out, but you have like a point you're working towards, or a kind of intuition or something where you're exercising agency and directing that change. I think that's the important.
That's a great point, Jeffrey. And that's actually going to be the next thing we talk about is, there's going to be one point before that, but the thing after realistic idealist conversation is going to be about what is the goals that we're going after. So I agree with you. Change is constant. Buddhism really teaches that too, is that, the only constant is change. The reason that they say that there's no soul is because the concept of the soul was static. And it's not that they don't believe in the concept of, what most people would call a soul, but it's rather that they would say that the soul is ever changing. So it's just not a static thing. So yeah, no constant but change. The only constant is change.
Hi, Garrett. Maybe you can, anybody that has questions, maybe kind of jot them down or put them in chat, and Garrett's going to continue to read point 2A and 2B.
Great. So guys, if you don't mind, we're gonna move it. Ellis is our timekeeper. She's really good at that. I lose track. I have so much fun in these that I just like totally lose track of time. I'm in what I have learned actually at the last meetup. Someone pointed out that what I called flow historically was not like in strict definition with the guy who coined the term. So I'm trying to coin a new term, which is positive flow, which is all the good stuff from flow without any of the negative stuff. We can talk about that later if anyone's interested. I can bring up the distinction. I'm blanking on his name, although I gave him I wanted to give him credit for it, but it was Jack, but I don't think I know his last name. But anyway, I'm going to go into like why I'm a realistic idealist and why I think you should be one too. And so the idealist is basically like a dreamer, right? Cloud in the head, like head in the clouds, and like might be a visionary, think of an exciting future, and that would be great to be a part of, but they're often not realistic, right? And so the realist is usually the first to point out the idealist's visions are unrealistic, and how are they possibly going to achieve these super grand visions, right? And generally the idealist doesn't have a good answer, but the idealist's intentions are generally good. Their heart is in the right place, but they aren't always great at accomplishing things because they don't have a realistic path to get there. But the realist will often say, the idealist's goals are unrealistic and unachievable. And I'm going to actually say, well, let me then introduce the realist, which the realist at best, a realist with good intention is limited in what they can achieve because they often haven't stretched themselves far enough because they're so grounded in reality that they're not thinking really big, right? They're very pragmatic and very practical, and they're not thinking big. And so that realistic approach tends to ground them in what they're capable of because their vision is limited. And so I would say at worst, realists can justify immoral behavior by saying that it's necessary in order to be successful. People have to do this unethical thing, and therefore, I'm a realist and I know that it's a dog eat dog world, and so I'm going to beat other people up. I'm going to take advantage of other people because that's how you be successful in this world. And so at the worst, a realist can be very immoral and use realism to justify immorality. Generally, though, I want to introduce a new concept, which is the realistic idealist. And this is someone that has, and this is what I strive to be, is have the dreams of an idealist, right? Like you're dreaming big, you're not limiting yourself to time or money. You're just saying, what do I want to accomplish, with no boundaries, right? Don't even consider boundaries. And, just what could ever be achieved, in any time period and with any resources. And then you bring it back to ground it in terms of, well, what can I achieve in my life? well, what can I achieve in the next 10 years? What can I achieve in the next 1 year? What can I achieve in the next month? What can I achieve in the next week? What can I achieve in the next day? And now if you've tied all those things together, and I talk about this in my presentation on how to achieve your life's goals in a state of what I will now call positive flow, rather than just flow, how you can use that paradigm that I just mentioned to really actively create SMART, which are specific, measurable, ambitious, realistic, and time-bound goals. SMART goals are commonly known in industry. It's the right way to set goals, except your life goals don't have to be SMART goals, right? I mean, it is time-bound. I guess you do want it to be realistic. It is ambitious. It is measurable. It is specific. So I guess they can still be SMART goals, but they might be long-term SMART goals. Right. And whereas most people look at, SMART goals as more short-term goals. But the idea is what you do is you take this grand vision that you have and you create step-by-step goals in helping yourself achieve that vision. And so the first thing I want to do is make the case for being a realistic idealist is what I think we should all be. Like, we should all feel excited about our vision for ourselves and the world that we're going to live in and be a part of, and feel like we can make a difference. And then, not be bound by limitations that are unnecessary. And then from there, create a clear path to making our dent in the world in terms of achieving the world that we want to see happen, one step at a time. So that's my case for why I think, why I'm a realistic idealist and why I think you should be one too. And that said, I'm going to go into questions, and we'll start with Bets on the realistic idealist topic.
Sure. I do think that's kind of the best way to be. Like you said, you set out to have goals and have a positive mindset and trying to achieve those through the, setting up SMART goals. At the same time, maybe, I don't know if you have seen the younger generations, specifically millennials and Gen Zs, they have a higher rate of depression and doomerism. Why? Because, the world that we have inhabited as millennials has been like one catastrophe after another. 9/11, the war in Iraq, the 2008 crash, climate change, now the recession. So all of these things kind of add up and become kind of traumatic, and it's kind of hard not to give in to doomerism. So how do you create this vision for yourself and the world when you see the world around you kind of collapsing in various fronts, in the front of climate change and in the front of like financial collapse? And it's kind of hard to keep a positive mindset when you see this every day and your life has been filled with catastrophic traumatic events. Like, how would you go about that?
Great question, Bets. This is where I'm going to lean on stoicism's wisdom. Basically you separate what you can control from what you can't control. We can't control whether coronavirus comes into the world. We can control whether or not we wear a mask and get vaccinated, which we need to do that as a topic for another night, is to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. That is the question. So let's take that down as a future event that we should talk about. So there's only so much that's in our control. And if you separate what's in your control from what's out of your control, then, you only focus your effort on, you can only focus your happiness on what's in your control, and only focus your effort on what's in your control, and only worry about the things in your control. Then you're not worrying about those things, outside of your sphere of influence. Now, it's certainly like helpful to be well informed about those things, to the extent that, like a lot of global international politics do get affected by who we vote for politically in the political process. So I'm not saying don't watch the news or ignore everything that's going on in the world. I'm saying, yeah, be informed, but don't be overly informed. Get to know enough to know, who to support and who not to support in terms of civic duty. But then beyond that, don't stress about things that you can't do anything about, because it doesn't really add value. And all it does is wear you down and make you less capable at the things you can control, which are the ones that you can use to influence your own life and the lives of people you can influence, the people that you care most about in life. And so that's, I guess that's my response to that, Beth. Does that make sense?
Yes, just like an additional follow-up to that.
Yeah.
I understand, like, separating the things that you can control and the things that you can. However, the things that you don't control also affect you. So how do you minimize their effects? I would say, like, for example, you cited the pandemic. Like,
Yep.
that's the thing that you have absolutely no control over, but still is going to affect your life. Climate change is one thing that you don't have any control over. It still is going to affect your life. So how do you minimize the effect of things that are uncontrollable?
With the things that are in your control. It's the answer, right? Is take the things in your control. Like if you're in a climate where, and I don't know if climate change is even a good example for that, but if you're like in a pandemic, right? What did a lot of people do in New York City when there were no vaccines? They moved to more rural areas where they were less likely to get coronavirus when they, because they weren't interacting with as many people on as regular basis. Now, that was something in their control that minimized their risk at getting a once in 100-year contagious disease that, had a 5% death ratio at the high point in the beginning, before people knew how to treat it. And so, there are lots of things we can do in our control. And then, now that people can get vaccinated, there's, very little risk once you're vaccinated for coronavirus. There is still some, but not really more than the flu. Quite frankly, it's actually much less harmful than the flu once you're vaccinated. So, there's a, does that answer your question, Beth? I don't want to go on too much.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Aisha.
Sorry, hi. I think that was Bets, I really feel your commentary and your description of how it's really easy for millennials to feel that kind of doom and gloom. I think I just kind of want to, in addition to the I think our world has become so global, and really telecommunications in particular. Like, I mean, I'm a geriatric millennial, so like in middle school we had computers and printers, but I remember beepers and I remember recorded phones and all of that junk. And I think that, and I'm also going to bring in the 1990s classic The Net with Sandra Bullock on it, where her identity was taken over because she stayed at home and no one knew who she was, and she like ordered out, and it was like, I kind of look back at that and think how ironic. But I kind of mention it because the way in which we communicate, and communication is ultimately how we relate to each other, has drastically changed. And it's one of those, in my head, it's one of those, I don't know, two extremes, or two, like a juxtaposition where we're both like overly connected and underly connected, if that makes sense. Yeah, and so I just feel that a lot. And I think that our generation, and I'm a teacher, I'm a middle school teacher, so I look at like my students now and I look at their generation and think like how grateful I am that like Facebook didn't exist when I was in middle school. I mean, they are experiencing things that no human in known history has ever experienced before. And there's not a lot of adjustment happening in our society to think about how these things might affect us. Yeah, so that was kind of like one comment that I wanted to respond to. I also I've never come across this idea, but I really love the idea of the realistic idealist. I think it's really beautiful, and that we need to hear it more. And then the last thing I wanted to say, and I'm curious about this, so I'm going to make a comment without the thought being fully developed, which is like all conversation for me. But the idea of politeness, like I wonder if when I hear politeness, to me as a female, it's incredibly loaded. It's something that a lot of times in our culture, women are encouraged to be polite over assertive. And I think that that can really hinder us in a lot of ways. Again, this is the part where like my idea still need to kind of think more deeply about that. But I understand, I feel like what I jotted down, because you said like being authentic and polite, and I love the authentic and genuine piece. I fully support that, like with all of my being. I think one of the rules that I have in my classroom, because it's really easy to tell kids what to do and like, you know, don't be rude or do this or don't do that. But I actually tell them to, you know, treat others well, or people will say treat others how you want to be treated. And, you know, sometimes I think like, I don't know how my kids are feeling, and my kids deal with, you know, trauma and depression and all of these things. And maybe they don't think they deserve to be treated well. So I like the idea of, I tell them to treat others the way that you want someone you love to be treated. So think about like someone that you really love, like how do you want them to be treated? Treat people that way. And I think that that kind of, for me, kind of clearly a lot more words than polite, but kind of sidesteps I think there's like gender identity politics that I didn't realize before this, that are, I think, kind of caught up in that. But yeah, I'm talking too much. Please, you can unmute and tell me to stop talking because I talk too much and too long. But
okay,
yeah,
I do too, Aisha. We're together in that. So I'll try to be brief here and say, yeah, like, thank you about the comment about realistic idealist. I would love for you to share that essay with people. I think I made it up, as far as I know I did. But then again, I thought I made up other stuff, and it turned out someone thought of it before me. So if someone finds that was true, then let me know and I'll cite the correct source in the paper. But that said, you know, for now, I'll think I thought it up myself. And yeah, your version of politeness is what I meant, which is, you know, sort of the treat other people with love and compassion, and, you know, show that you care about them. Yes, be honest with them, but show that you care about them in the way that you communicate with them. Even if you dislike them, you should still care about them as a fellow human being. And, you know, that's where I would say politeness is important, even with someone that you dislike. In fact, sometimes even most importantly, someone you dislike. And so that said, thank you for your comments, Aisha. Great comments. Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, my response was to the previous question about, and I think I was thinking about how, like, if someone's trying to change you, I remember like, for example, I had a friend who said to be the person you want to be, and it felt like she was trying to change me. It's like this weird dance where if you feel like someone's kind of, you know, asking for something, like they're saying, you know, hey, like, I'll give an example on someone else. Like, I read a Yelp review, and it said about these people serving coffee. They seem annoyed when you ask questions. And I was like, I know what she means, but I want to, when I'm writing on the Yelp reviews, I want them to say, like, can you give one, you know, max 2 observations that make you think that thought?
Right.
Because it always makes it smaller, because if it's like, well, they walk away and they're like, of course, like, that sounds a lot smaller than if you're like, really, I just didn't like it that they say of course with a kind of snappish tone. That sounds a lot smaller than they seem annoyed when you ask questions. So I think, like, it's always this weird, delicate, like, you know, if you tell somebody, hey, there's room for improvement, that sounds very, like, critical. Like, I get a kind of, but if someone says, you know, hey, like I'm walking with my dog and someone said to me, be nice, you know, say hi. It was like, well, why don't you just say, hey, you know, like, I'd really like it if you said hi to me. You seem, you know, sweet or friendly, and it would make my day if you said hi, like, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, Katie. And I think your natural inclination there is like exactly what I've learned. I think you've probably learned it younger than I did, which is when I disagree with someone, I want to ask, why did you think that? And that's what you're asking the Yelp review people to do, although you can't ask the Yelp reviewers to do that. And don't get me started on Yelp. I have a food tech company and know all of the reasons that the movie $1 Billion Bully came about. And so they're a very interesting company. I'll say it that way. But yeah, I think it's important when someone, whenever we disagree with someone, to like ask why they think that, and get clarification, because it usually it's a misunderstanding. And actually, I've cited this before, the statistic that over 90% of the time that there's conflict, it's as a result of a misunderstanding rather than an actual disagreement of things. And so I think it's so important to get clarity rather than to, disagree with someone. First, get clarity that you understood them correctly. And that's what reflective listening is so good at. Repeat back to someone what you think they said. When you think that what they said is crazy, repeat back to them what you think that you heard. And then you will find that they almost always go, oh no, that's not what I meant. And so since I started doing that, it's been very helpful. That said, David, go ahead.
Oh, I just had a couple of quick little comments. I remember you said earlier on that philosophy has answers, but I don't. Science, I think, has answers. Philosophy has good questions without the definite answers that science has. I mean, for sure, science is helping philosophy, and that a lot of questions that philosophy is involved in, science tends to point a way towards an answer, but not all questions. A lot of questions people have are questions about life and what's the meaning of it and what should we do and blah blah blah. All these rather vague questions that are not going to be answered definitely. But on the other hand, groups like this help. The other comment I was going to do to say that I think people tend to think that, I mean, it seems to me, a lot of people think that we're in like the worst of all possible times. Whereas I think that we're actually in one of the best times, not perhaps, I mean, who knows, it's the best, but I do think there's an interesting book written by Michael Shermer, who's quite I don't know if anyone's heard of him, but he's quite a positive philosopher. And he wrote a book called The Moral Arc, where he argues that on all sorts of indices, such as murder rates and all the rest, we're living in a golden age. And sure, there's climate change hanging over us, but there's always, and historically, being major problems hanging over the world, say. And so the question is it really worse now, or perhaps it's actually a lot better? Like, look at the last century, the 2 world wars, and prior centuries, war was ubiquitous, and we still have some, but they're rather smaller scale. They don't involve the entire world, notwithstanding Ukraine. So that's all I want to say, I guess. Thank you.
Thanks. I didn't have time to fact check who wrote the book first, but I read Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now, which said the same thing that you said David Shermer said in The Moral Arc. So one of them came up with it first, and I'd love to credit whoever it was. Yeah, we do live in the healthiest, wealthiest, safest world that has ever existed in humanity. And yes, we have lots of, huge and important problems to solve and challenges, but let's be thankful for the good stuff. And let's also keep fighting to make things better for the future generations, as well as our generation. And yeah, David, I don't mean to say that philosophy has as strictly accurate answers as science does. I don't think that it does yet. But I think there are some answers that can be said to be agreeable by all reasonable people. When I get to the point where someone would be considered unreasonable to disagree with something, then I would argue that it's a pretty solid ground to stand on. And
that's actually the definition of science. Scientific proof means supported to such an extent it would be perverse to withhold provisional consent. That's Stephen Jay Gould's definition of scientific fact, which is what you just said about philosophy. But I would argue it's only in science.
And in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy uses the definition I gave for morality, actually, is where I get that definition from, is that one definition of morality is that a moral would be agreeable by all reasonable people. And, I give the very sort of emotion pumping example of child rape as like an example that any reasonable person would agree child rape is wrong, right? Like, that's just, for me, that's like uncontestable. Like, child rape is objectively wrong, in my opinion. And so I would argue that's a moral that, you know, really hard to contest, that there's some justification for that ever, you know, or under any circumstance. And so, you know, I would argue there are answers in philosophy, and there are lots of people who argue there is no such thing as morality. And I would argue those people are wrong. I'm going to make the bold statement and say, even though some of them, many of them are PhDs, I think they're wrong. And, you know, I would love to hear their justification for what I just said is, I think, an objective moral. But that said, you know, I do think that there are answers in philosophy, but ultimately we each have to be the judge of which of those answers we want to agree with. And part of the goal of the Freethinker Institute is to get us all thinking really critically and really, you know, hone our critical thinking skills so we can decide which philosophical answers we want to agree with. And ultimately, it should be up to each one of us which ones we agree with, even in the case that I gave before, although I think that all reasonable people will agree with me on that statement. But that said,
Yeah.
Robert, you want to go next? I'm sorry, did you want to say something else in response, David?
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, that example is the extreme example that, as you said, most reason. But there's a heck of a lot of
There's a lot of middle ground
questions. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a heck of a lot of ethical questions, such as abortion, where there is not
Yes.
that consensus. So, you know, it's not that easy. You picked an easy example,
I did.
but in a lot of morality or ethical discussions, there is no correct answer in the sense of objectively correct.
And I don't know if you were there for our discussion on abortion. Were you, David?
No.
Okay, we did do a discussion on that recently. Hopefully it'll be up on YouTube before too long. I would welcome your feedback on that, because actually I do think it's an answerable question. And I tried to propose my answer to it. And I would love your feedback on it, but I want to let Robert go.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I guess I would say, like, I'm not sure science can effectively tell people what to do with their lives. I mean, you could argue philosophy can't do that either, but I feel like philosophy would be more helpful in that respect. And yeah, and just about living in a, I don't know, a good time period. I kind of agree, at least for myself. Yeah, living where I am now versus if I was born 100 years ago, it seems a lot better now. There was this show about Dracula, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but he eventually comes into the future or the present, and he's shocked because he says, like, regular people live like kings. And it's kind of true. Like, I have all this great technology, I have clean water, I have a fridge, I have indoor plumbing. So like, yeah, I mean, 100 years ago, people didn't necessarily have those things. Although it's also worth remembering that lots of people around the world right now don't have a lot of those things. So today, I would say is only better in certain areas. Not, I don't know if it's better everywhere around the world. Anyways, but yeah, back to, I guess, the main topic. I do agree with a lot of what Garrett was saying earlier, where you should sort of figure out what you want to do and not necessarily let other people influence you away from that. The way I look at it, I ask, like, what do you want to do? And do you want it because society tells you you're supposed to want it? Or do you want it because you actually want it? Because that can be tricky sometimes too. But yeah, it's sort of like, I guess I'm a bit more idealist. It's like, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? And if you don't know right now, then I guess your goal could be to figure that out. But yeah, and then from there, I do agree, you have to be a little practical, like take a step back and think, is there a way that I can make what I want to be part of my life? But the part that I don't fully mesh with is, like, I don't think I necessarily have to be the best version of myself to do that. And I don't necessarily have to be successful to be doing what I want. And I don't necessarily have to achieve anything to be able to do what I want. I just, the only thing I'd need to figure out is how I can make it a part of my life. So yeah, I think doing what you want can be enough on its own. So yeah, my philosophy is to sort of reject what you're supposed to want and figure out what you actually want. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Robert. And I guess I agree with you, Robert. Science doesn't generally tell us how to live our lives. Philosophy is what teaches wisdom. Science teaches knowledge, and the two are very compatible and go hand in hand and are mutually exclusive, in my opinion, in a lot of cases with some overlap. So I shouldn't say mutually exclusive. There is overlap, but the other thing, as far as people living like kings, I read somewhere, I think it was a book, a medieval history book, that people in the modern world that are in poverty eat better than medieval kings ate. And that was like very telling for me about how far we've come since medieval Europe, which is an epoch that I'm very interested in. That said, I do want to jump back to the presentation portion if we could.
Garrett,
yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you wanted to touch on what people's goals are a little, or do you just want to
That's what the next part of the presentation is, Ellis.
Oh, good. And I guess Shane Marie was waiting, but she'll go after. Okay.
Where is she? Does she have her hand up?
She had it up. I don't know if she's still there.
I didn't see her hand. So let me just go into the next portion. Is basically agreeing with Robert is we should decide what we want for our lives and go after that. And all I would argue is we should do it step by step. I would still posit that being the best version of ourselves will make us more effective at getting what we want to go after in life. And so I think that's a good thing to do. But then, I like to talk about, like I said, be an idealist and, setting your goals for yourself. And I'm going to put these in the chat. I like to put goals into, a bunch of different categories. And for people who want to learn more about being a member of the Freethinker Institute, we go into these more. And as part of the application process for membership, is we talk about life goals in terms of material things that we want to be able to own or acquire, experiences that we want to have, personality traits we want to develop, accomplishments and achievements that we want to accomplish or achieve in life, skills that we want to develop, like life skills, personal skills, professional skills, habits that we want to create, things that we want to create an affiliation towards, like to get more affiliated with, and then relationships that you want to create in life. And so I would argue that if you think of all of those things, that really looks at life goals across a variety of dimensions that put a full picture into and a full living color into what you want to accomplish in life. And then once you've done that, you can break it down into smaller goals, which is the trick to achieving really meaty, difficult goals, is breaking them down into smaller goals, which are accomplishable and you can make tangible progress towards. So that's the list I came up with. I welcome feedback on everything. And if anyone can think of another category, let me know. But if you are interested in membership of the Freethinker Institute, one of the things that we do is we have prospective members fill out a personal profile. And one of the things in the profile is, what are your life goals in all of these categories? And we also talk about the things you want to avoid in all of those categories, because that's kind of the direction that you want to go in your life, right? And what are the things you want to avoid in your life across each of those categories? And another thing we talk about is, and that I talk about in my How to Achieve Your Life's Goals in a State of Flow, is habit forming. And so creating positive habits, the first habit you should create is one that helps you make progress towards your life goals. And so that's the first habit I always recommend forming, which is talked about in the lecture. And then the other is like positive habits that help you basically increase your capabilities to be the best version of yourself and better seek truth. And so, habits like improving critical thinking skills that we work on in the Freethinker Institute is a great habit to form. And coming to these events, you will gradually form that habit, because that's a big part of what we're focused on. And learning about different perspectives on the world is another thing you'll learn here. So that said, did you have I think now is time for your question, Ellis, if you want to ask that to the group.
Okay. I was asking if anyone has any goals that they're working on in these areas, if they're experiencing any success or failures. You're welcome to share. and anybody else who has questions as well.
And so Will has his hand up, so let's let Will go.
Thank you. I was just thinking that I guess as far as being the best version of yourself, the most important thing you have to achieve that is your mind. So the single most effective tool is to improve your mind. If you think of like the brain as a hardware system or a computer that you were given at birth in a box, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's the brain you had with all your innate talents, your abilities, and your and the downside as well, the things you aren't so good at, but that's what you've got. And then you've got your software program that allows you to function in the world, and that's your mind. And the mind is sort of independent of that hardware. And the best way to get the most out of it is through decluttering, like defragmenting a computer. And the best way to achieve that is through meditation. So I think whatever you want to do, if you meditate daily, you sort of get a sense of clarity, and then you can gravitate towards what you want, and you learn to have the correct intentions as well. And you don't fuse with unnecessary negative influences. And that is the single most valuable tool you have, is your mind. So the more you can clear your mind, I'm not saying I've nailed it at all. I've got a particularly scattered mind, but I know through meditation, I've been able to get the best out of it that I can in my current circumstances. And the Buddhist philosophers say it's like a base camp, and you're at the base of the mountain, and every trial and tribulation you have in life, you're climbing the mountain. But when you get the chance through meditation, you are decluttering the base camp, and the clearer it is, the better you can navigate life. So that was a very convoluted explanation of what I think on achieving your best self. Thanks. I hope I got the message through a little bit, intention of what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate that. Yeah, and I use meditation sort of opportunistically when I'm like not thinking rationally. If I'm frustrated or angry, meditation and clearing my mind help me think more rationally and clearly, which, is kind of that clearing the base camp, right? It's like, like the most supportive part of your mind is the rational mind. That's the one that's going to lead you in the right direction more often than not. The emotional mind and the reptilian mind usually don't have as good advice to follow in, I should say, the negative emotional mind. Positive emotion, even then, like I would argue the rational mind, like I have a chart I could bring up if anyone's interested on my paradigm. I have a 4-blocker on heart and mind, when your heart and mind agree or don't agree on something, and when to make which decision. So if anyone is interested in that, Aisha's nodding, so I'll bring it up in a little bit, but I want to let Bets go next.
Thank you. For me, I think the most important out of your list is experiences. I think material things are good to have, but I think that, in the long term, I think experiences are the things that enrich your life the most. And also creating experiences where you can help other people and other beings, that for me has been the most rewarding. So for example, I love animals, especially dogs. I volunteer at Houston SPCA, and it brings me a lot of joy to help animals escape situations of abuse and help them get adopted. And I love spending time with dogs. Another thing is, I also volunteer at a women's shelter and homeless shelter, and it brings me joy to help people in difficult situations find a way out. And spending time with my family, traveling. So I think experiences are the way to enrich your life, not just by having a brand new car or a brand new computer or a brand new cell phone, but having experiences that you can look back on and you can think like your life is rich because of that. Now, the other thing that you guys brought up was like, what does it mean? Like you want to be authentic and you want to be the best version of yourself. And that seems to be competing in a way, because you like, if you, how can you be authentic, but then you have to change yourself? I think you can be authentic if you stick to your core values. So for instance, if your core value is social justice or creativity, something that is like very unique to your identity, and you're trying to change that, or people are trying to change that, that goes to the core of your identity and it makes you feel like you're not being true to yourself. So in that sense, like I wouldn't want to change the core of my identity, but there's some things that I'm willing to change. For instance, I used to, curse a lot and be very impatient. And I have changed those things in my life. And I think they have made me a more patient and a better person for that. And then the last thing that I want to mention is, yes, I think that, yes, we live in a better world. More people have access to the internet, material possessions. Like you said, there's people that their lives have improved materially and the murder rates have decreased. But also, we live in a world that is very connected. It's on 24 hours and it's hard to turn it off. And also we have additionally this existential crisis like climate change, the pandemics, and we have the capacity to kill ourselves because we have a huge arsenal of nuclear weapons. And that in itself, having that in the back of our minds, at least for me, that we have the capacity to like exterminate ourselves is a huge burden that a lot of people brings them a lot of anxiety and doom.
So totally hear you, Bets, and I agree that helping others is a great way to spend experiences. And I agree, and I think we're saying the same thing around being authentic and being true to your core values, which values is another part of the personal profile for membership of the FTI. I think it's great that you've improved yourself and that's made you a better person. That's exactly what I want members to help each other do, so that we can all be better people and improve, and while retaining our authenticity with our goals, our values, the things that we shouldn't change, but then helping us change the things that we should to be even better than we are now. And I'll bet, Bets, that has helped you increase your sphere of influence through that self-improvement. And I think it will for everybody. And while I agree we live in a very connected world and it's hard to turn it off, and we do have existential crises, I'm going to encourage you again to not worry about what's out of your control. What you can do is vote for people. When we did a meetup on climate change where we did a lot of analysis, and we showed that that the temperature of the earth has risen 1 degree in each of the last 200 years. And prior to that, it took 260,000 years since Earth's history to increase temperature that fast. Can you please close the door? And so, I do think that climate change is an issue, and I think that we should take action on it. But that said, all we can do is vote for people that seem to support that, and have logical approaches to supporting it. And that said, Remco hasn't spoken, so I want to let him go, if you don't mind, Aisha.
Oh, well, thank you, Garrett, and hi, everybody. Look, I've been sitting on the sidelines and listening to the discussion, and I originally had my hand up, Garrett, and I pulled it down because I'm on a different wavelength quite clearly. I think one of my key issues is that, well, let me start it this way. I have a little bit of an advantage over you guys. I'm older than all of you, and I've been through quite a few phases in my life. And amongst those phases, being fully educated with a master's in business admin when it had some value, I had all those sort of credentials to go and live life, define goals, and work through life. And, you know, one of the wake-up calls later in life is that there is no me to me. There's only a story that I say. And whatever you know, guys, I'm very mindful of the topic, Garrett, and your topic is how to be the person you want to be. And, you know, I wanted to be the person that defined goals. I defined goals in a good MBA fashion in Harvard's formulae, and you live to that. And I think everything that I hear people say, except for that one person who left, and he left earlier, I think his name is David or someone, was trying to say that. And I had a little bit of a wake up, call it an epiphany, about 20 years ago. And I put it to the test quite accidentally. And I said, there is no me. There's just a well-refined, well-honed story. And with my story, I can impress people. And at that time, I could talk MBA talk, I could talk science talk, I could talk economics, I could talk all these blah, blah, blah things. And I can be impressive. I had my double-breasted suit. I ran conferences. I'm not trying to impress you, but I had a wake-up call. And my wake-up call is there's nothing to me. And I was in India, for example, and I ended up in a hill station, and I was rather pissed off with the amount of filth in that place. And I went back because friends were saying to me, look, Rem, either stop talking about this dirty country or do something about it. Well, I went back. And I motivated that town to clean up. And how did I do it? I created a possibility for them, a possibility which was beyond me and something that they wanted. And you know something else? It isn't just about the town, because I was stopped that night by a group of girls, and they said, "Please, sir, can we take charge of the road?" And I said to my wife, "My God, they're asking me as a foreigner." Sorry, I'm talking fast because I'm fearing Alice will jump on me in a minute for talking over my 4 minutes. But anyway, the point is, those girls came to me and said, "Look, can we take charge of the road?" And I said, "My God, what do I do?" And my wife, who's a pretty tough bitch, a lovely woman, she's not here right now. And I said, "Okay, well, I'll continue." And I did. I got 10 cities and towns in India in a cleanup mode. I'm not an activist, but I talk to schools in a way that, you know, it was empowering. And in 2014, Prime Minister Modi declared My Clean India, which was my theme, which was my banner. When I was there in 2019, I was driven around in Modi's car, and I was at a school and I saw a poster I had designed in Lucknow, which was 600 kilometers away. I'm not trying to impress you guys. All I'm trying to say is be careful that you don't get caught up in your stories. And all of those words, and Garrett, you drew up a list of things. They're very articulate. I'm trying not to criticize, but look, I would urge anybody, if you want to live life powerfully, and I have since then. I'm not going to try say things that has happened in my more recent years. I say be authentic. Simply be authentic, meaning be in integrity, say your word, whatever it is, stick with it. Don't go and analyze yourself like a robot. Don't go and create a formula for yourself and talk about your brain and your mind and all the programming that goes in. Just be yourself. Never say no. And just be prepared to admit that there is no me. The only me that there is a well-honed story of myself and my fears that are sitting there in the background. And hey, you can achieve amazing things with that attitude. It's so liberating. It's so, you know, you get to a point where me as a chemical engineer ended up talking to 100 schools in India, the principals, and hey, don't denigrate the schools over there. Some of them are better than some in my country and possibly yours. So that's really what I'm saying. Create a possibility, jump into it, never say no, and you will have whatever you want. That's my theme. And so I'm sorry, it sounds very fluffy. I've done all the ritual. That's my story. Thank you, Garrett, for giving me the opportunity to blow my fuse a little bit or release the pressure valve.
No worries, Remco. It sounds like you thought you were disagreeing with me, but I felt like you agree with me 110%, quite frankly, because you know, we're both saying be your authentic self, have goals, be a positive influence on the world. So, you know, I see us totally aligned, even though I guess you see us as disagreeing, but I'm okay with that. You know, if you want to clarify.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Garrett. I'm just calling and screaming. Don't create formulae for yourself. Don't talk about rudeness. Don't talk about power and all of these things, and setting careful material goals, that makes rigidity. Be fluid. That's I think if you're going to be powerful, be extremely fluid. Just float. When I got an invite to make a keynote address on rivers, I mean, I know nothing about rivers. And I flew to India, I made the keynote address there on rivers. And, I keep getting invitations from specialists from that. I know nothing, but if you just say yes, do a little bit of research as I did, and you can have an amazing life. I wish I was, look, I'm now in my 70s. I just wish I could wind the clock back and be where I was in my 20s as a young scientist and engineer. I had all this crap in my head about how I should be. Anyway,
yeah, but clearly you had goals about what you wanted to do, right? You created experiences in India. You had accomplishments that you accomplished in India, and you must have wanted to accomplish those things. You set the goal for the city in India that you did it the first time. So again, like, I don't see that as I'm creating a structure because I think a lot of people work better within structure. Remco, maybe you don't work well within structure, and that's cool. Like, then go freeform. No. And for people that want to go freeform, cool, go freeform. For people that want structure, I try to provide a structure that is easy to follow and adds value to people's lives. I don't think that there's a right way or a wrong way. But I will say that I think that being rude is wrong. And I will make that bold claim that being rude is never going to help you. And Confucius taught that, thousands of years ago. And I think he's still right. You're always better off being polite as long as you're honest. Like, you don't want to lose honesty, but you're always better off being polite. And I've tried to contrive, and I'm pretty good at finding loopholes. I've tried to contrive any situation under which being ruder and is better, and I can't really think of one. So that said,
can I just say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because I might be cut off here. I just want to be clear, Garrett. Don't have goals that are your goals. I mean, I did say I had 10 cities and towns within 12 months, and I achieved that within 12 months too.
Right.
But I want to say, make them their goals. Make it the goals beyond yourself. They're not my goals, they're their goals, and enroll them into that possibility. It's theirs, not yours. And I think that's all I want to say. Thank you, Garrett.
Yeah, no, I really try to live by and love the phrase by shoot, I'm blanking on his name. The sales guru Zig Ziglar, who said, help enough people achieve, I'm paraphrasing, help enough people achieve their goals in life, and you'll end up achieving your goals. And that's really what I try to do too, Remco. And I agree with you. Help other people achieve their goals. And yeah, like, it's good to have our own goals too, but it's also good, and I think, I do have my own goals, but I'm often trying to achieve my goals by looking for a way that I can help someone else achieve their goals while also achieving my goals. And that's a win-win scenario, right? And if we can both achieve our goals together, now our goals are aligned, our efforts are aligned, and now you create a bigger organization. And that's what I'm trying to do with the Freethinker Institute is, create a group of people that all want to be the best version of themselves and help us each achieve each other's goals and create this tight-knit network of people that want to support each other in growth and development. It's not all about me. And I agree with you. I'm very anti-egotist, egotism. But that said, I do want to kind of go into the last phase of what I wanted to present because
Hi, Garrett. Yes, I was going to say that. Maybe Shane Marie can go, and then you can go on to number 3.
Yeah, Shane Marie, go ahead first, and then I'll go on to the last portion of the presentation.
Okay, sorry, I just was deeply fascinated. I think there were 2 strong instances here, both, and I mean no disrespect, but with both Aisha and Remco, where it's quite obvious that they perceive something through their own lens, I think, both in terms of femininity and then in terms of the history that Remco has. I know we all do that. I don't think it's unique to any particular one individual, but it's deeply fascinating to see it in action, how quickly we misunderstand the message of another or what's their truth. And that's very challenging to navigate, both what we do to others and what's done to us. So it's truly very fascinating to think that we can ever kind of communicate well with all of that going on. The next thing that I had kind of takes off from what Remco said is that I'm curious, 2 things, if you will, if you could suggest how that we aim towards goals that have continued meaning. So not these superficial goals that society tells us we should pursue, but ones that have longstanding value for us, which I do think all goals potentially do, because some more superficial goals might get us further along towards deeper, more meaningful goals. So maybe we need those up front, and then we keep continuing to evolve and navigate towards those more meaningful goals. So, but initially in identifying, especially at my age, if we can have a sense of how we aim to establish meaningful goals up front. And then, if you will, one more thing, can you suggest what functions as the greatest catalyst to begin movement towards a goal when you're in a stationary or stuck position, if you will? Thank you.
Sure. I think your point about the perception was really dead on. And what I tried to do in both cases is say, look, I don't know if I did it well with Aisha. I think I actually glossed over it, which I shouldn't have. The point about there's a lot of I think a lot of people use politeness as a sexist tool against women to say you need to be more polite and not point out when I'm wrong. I'm the boss and you're a woman and you're not supposed to tell me I'm wrong. And there's a lot of like sexism used to like, under the guise of politeness. And so I think that might be where Aisha was coming from. And I didn't mean to invalidate that. I do acknowledge that does happen, but I did try to clarify what I meant by politeness rather than, what I think often passes as being called, a calling for politeness. And then same with Remco, I tried to clarify back where I felt like we were actually more aligned than I think Remco thought we were, and clarify what I meant rather than, what I said is what I like to say on a regular basis is, what I meant. And I think that in the spirit, Remco and I often agree, even though when we talk, sometimes we disagree, but I think we fundamentally agree on more things than we disagree, quite frankly. And I wasn't clear. I wasn't sure if you were asking me or Remco about the aim towards goals that have continued meaning. I'm happy to chime in on that, but I wasn't sure. Like I sort of wasn't sure if you were asking him or me.
No, I was asking you if you could kind of give suggestion how we make sure that we aim at proper, meaningful goals for ourselves, even with the understanding that we're growing and developing, and we might not always be perfectly on target from the get. Yeah,
we're never going to be perfectly on target, even at the end. So this is a marathon, and if half of the world is right, we're going to keep this marathon going even after we die. And so it's a really long-term marathon. So yeah, I guess as far as how to make sure your goals have meaning, I am very much in the utilitarian camp in terms of like creating goals that increase happiness and decrease harm in the world for the largest number of people possible. And so, for me, the thing that gets me up in the morning, at 4 or 5 in the morning which is when I get up, and working all day until I go to sleep at 9 o'clock is, thinking about how much good can I do in the world in total. And, I look at ways that I can positively influence, starting from the people closest to me, but all the way out to as many people as I can influence in the world. And I think if you have those kinds of really ambitious and not limiting yourself idealist goals in mind, you'll come up with some pretty damn ambitious goals that are going to be really motivating. And all I would tell you is don't be discouraged if you don't achieve them in the first year. A lot of millennials are like, well, I'm not the CEO and I've been working for a year and a half. Well, what about the guy working for 40 years that's still not the CEO? Because there's only so many CEOs in the world. And so don't be discouraged if you haven't achieved those goals at any point in time. I came up with a new saying. I like to come up with sayings is keep your hopes high and your disappointment low. That's the only way to go. And so if you remember that, keep your hopes high and your disappointment low, it's the only way to go. I think and think really ambitiously about how you can increase happiness and decrease harm in the world. I think you're going to be finding that your goals are motivational, altruistic, and positive, both for yourself and for those you can influence. Does that answer your question, Shinri?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So with that said, I'm going to jump into the next portion of the discussion, which is, part of what, it was my reason for starting the Freethinker Institute, which is aspiring to have healthy relationships. And that is, trying to create a community within which we all have relationships with each other, which we do in these events, but then members will hopefully have even closer relationships as we create a membership organization. And the idea is basically to help each other be the best version of ourselves, seek truth, and be fair, which I think is a relatively agreeable set of goals, and would resonate with most people. And certainly I want to like attract as members people that those resonate with, so that we can help each other accomplish that. And I would argue that good like studies show that healthy relationships are actually the secret to longevity. It's actually I forget all I can say is like my memory recalls that having healthy relationships is actually a bigger indicator of longevity than even smoking versus non-smoking. So we're talking like major factor in terms of how long and happy of a life you live is the health of the relationships you have. So think about if you're rude all the time or even frequently, you're not going to have as many healthy relationships. Most people don't like to be treated rudely, right? Think about yourself. Do you want to be treated rudely? I don't like that. So, being polite helps us create more positive relationships. The more positive relationships we have and the more meaningful relationships we have, and really like having deep and meaningful relationships is a part of that is vulnerability and being able to be vulnerable with the people that you have good relationships with. And so there was a good YouTube when we did a YouTube like a session on relationships, and it talked about the trifecta of like healthy relationships, and one was frequency of interaction, 2 was having 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction, and then 3 was being vulnerable with each other. And most of my discussion that evening was about the vulnerability, because the first 2 were pretty straightforward. But how do you be vulnerable with people in a way that doesn't open you up to being hurt, too much, and still allows you to be vulnerable? How do you know whether or not to trust someone to be vulnerable? Those are more difficult questions, and I tried to answer those that evening. I don't know if that's up on YouTube or not. We can look on the YouTube channel and see. But if we lost that video, we'll record it again. But basically, the idea of having a members organization is one in which we can, be vulnerable with each other, share meaningful, ambitious goals, and help each other grow and help each other accomplish those goals. And surrounding yourself with people who will give you honest feedback. Like, a lot of people will say, like talk about like, are you a loyal person? Someone today called me loyal, and my response to that is, I'm actually loyal first to truth rather than to friends. And what I mean by that is, if a friend does something wrong, I'm going to point out that they did something wrong. And those are the friends that I want to surround myself with. And those are the friends that I want in the Freethinker Institute, where we help each other be better versions of ourselves, is what I mean by that, where we're more loyal to truth than we are to our friends. Because when you're lying for your friend, you're not really doing them a favor, right? Because they're going to end up suffering for that lie because they have a misunderstanding about themselves and the world. And so really, we want to surround ourselves with friends that will be honest with us about who we are and what we're doing. And so, if you have a community of people you can trust, then you can be transparent about your beliefs, and get feedback on them. And by being transparent about our beliefs, we expose the bad ideas to people who will expose them as bad ideas and tell us what a better idea is. And now we've learned either a piece of knowledge or a piece of wisdom. And either way, we've learned something new that helps us be, better navigate the world. So that's kind of, the last portion. And then I wanted to show my quick 4-blocker here, because Aisha nodded. I'm going to show you guys this. So basically what it is if the mind agrees with something, meaning it's rationally justified, versus if the heart agrees with something, meaning it's emotionally justified. If both agree, you just do it. If the mind agrees, but the heart doesn't agree, you do it if you're obligated. If the heart agrees, but the mind doesn't agree, then you do it if you can spare the time and resources. If neither one is aligned, just don't do it. Doesn't make sense. So that's I'm happy to share that in the online community. There's a couple precursors about growth and comfort zones and stuff like that that you might find useful. But with that said, Ellis, I think you have another question that you wanted to introduce. Am I right?
Oh, wow, intuitive. You're reading my mind. Okay, so it says here, are you able to be the type of person who can be friendly with people who have different views than you? And also, do you feel safe being authentic in your present environment with the people who surround you?
And Aisha, you haven't had long to think about that. So if you want, you can I can come back to you. But if you
or
want,
anybody, in the
you wanna-
meantime, I'll type in the questions.
Yeah,
I could answer.
go ahead.
I think I can be friendly with people that have differences of opinion. However, there are certain things that escalate the level of like rude, like things that are racist, homophobic, misogynistic, things of that sort. When somebody behaves in a certain way that is misogynistic or racist, it's kind of hard to be friendly with somebody in that position. Like I don't have a problem. For me, like I curse a lot, and I don't have a problem when people curse. I don't find it like necessarily rude to me. What I find rude more is like when somebody might be, like when you go to a restaurant and the waiter brings you your food and you don't say thank you or you don't say please. Like more manners, like the way you treat people rather than the words you use. But there are certain behaviors or attitudes that like I said, that can be racist, misogynistic, homophobic, that it's kind of hard to still be friendly with people that behave in that way.
So Bets, I hear you, and I realize that it's very frustrating to hear someone, do those things. But I would argue that so I don't want to digress too much on this. We should probably have a topic for it another night, but like for I'm just gonna try to be vague here so that I don't get too political. But for a long period of time, the things that you talk about, homophobia, sexism, racism, it was all, kind of some people would basically berate or, attack in a rude way people who had those beliefs. But many people who had those beliefs just kind of went undercover for a long period of time and kept those beliefs because there was no one giving them a good reason to change their beliefs. They just figured this person that was angry at them was wrong because they were angry at them and they had a bad temper. And so they just reaffirmed their beliefs within a community of people who reaffirmed those ill-founded beliefs. And so what we ended up seeing is that community of people actually grew rather than became smaller, even though the idea was to socially punish them. And I think that actually the right way to combat misinformed beliefs, which I would argue all of those are misinformed beliefs, is to talk about them politely and patiently and say, well, why do you think that? And actually there was a good book done by a guy who converted KKK members to be no longer KKK members. And he was a Black gentleman. And what he did is he would ask them, well, why do you have this belief? Like, where do these beliefs come from? And he wouldn't argue on the surface on the racist beliefs that these people had. He would say, how did you come to believe that racism is right? Like, why do you think that Black people are bad? Like, and he would ask questions, thoughtful, polite questions that made people question, why do I have this belief in the first place? And attack those beliefs at the root cause and the fundamental level. And thank you. Yes, it was Daryl Davis. I appreciate it, Pi. And I was trying to remember his name and I was blanking on it. So, and I thought that was so powerful. And so now I try to use the same technique in all kinds of philosophy and knowledge and wisdom, is like, ask people, why do they think what they think? And I alluded to that earlier, where when I think someone doesn't make sense, I say, well, why do you think that? Right. And I want to try to empathize with that person and say, how did you come to believe that that's true? And most of those people probably, they were born into a family that had those beliefs, and that's what they were taught, and they've just fundamentally never questioned them. And once you make them question them, they're going to realize that they don't have ground to stand on. And I'm not saying you're going to convince every one of them, but I'll say you'll have a better chance of convincing them if you politely engage with them and ask them thoughtful questions than you will by ignoring them, walking away from them, yelling at them, or being rude to them. So does that make sense, Beth?
No, it does. I mean, I understand, like, you need to ask open-ended questions. And like you said, a lot of disagreement comes down to miscommunication. And I understand that. At the same time, like, for instance, Daryl Davis, I think, you know, that man had balls of steel. I mean, he went to like rally for the KKK, you know, but I fear for his safety. What if they want to lynch him, you know, because these people hold these beliefs that are so damaging. Like the KKK used to kill people and lynch them and hang them from trees, you know. So when people hold certain beliefs, like my concern is, are they going to act on them? Like, for instance, people that are transphobic, are they going to, a lot of trans Black women are murdered because of transphobia, you know. And that's the problem, that I'm willing to engage with you, ask you open questions, all of that. But then I have this fear that if you have this very, you know, horrible belief like homophobia and racism, are you going to act in a way that are you going to be dangerous? You know, that's the issue. When the beliefs are so entrenched that you're willing to act on them and like storm, you know, storm the Capitol with guns and things like that. I mean, that makes me nervous when people act on certain beliefs. It's always, you have to take that chance. But yes, I do think that you have to ask open-ended questions and see why they believe those things. And Daryl Davis, I mean, he's a hero because he really did change a lot of people's minds, but, you know, at the expense of being murder. I mean, they could have killed him.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Martin Luther King, they did kill. So we know that heroes do die. But I would argue that if you're polite to someone who is racist and, you know, sexist, you're less likely to invoke their violence than you are if you're rude to them. Right? If you're rude to them, you're way more likely, you know, you're a jerk for being homophobic. Like, you're way more likely to incite them being violent to you then you say, oh, well, how is it that you decided that homophobia is the, you know, the right thing? Like, maybe, you know, and you can even play along and say, well, maybe I'm misunderstanding the world, and maybe I have misunderstanding, right? And maybe you've got the right answer here. I've never been homophobic. Why is it that you're homophobic? And then maybe I can explain to you why I'm not homophobic, and we can see who has a better reason here. And through, you know, open discourse and I'm going to use the very politically loaded term free speech to say that, you know, when I say free speech, I mean speech, like talking to people, which is what speech traditionally has been up until 2010. And so, you know, I'm talking about like open communication of ideas and free expression of ideas in a polite way ends up, you know, with people making better decisions, in my opinion. Does that make sense, Bets?
Yeah, it does. But, you know, like you bring up Martin Luther King, and this man was the Prince of Peace. And look, they gunned him down for his ideas. So,
totally.
you know,
look,
you always take a risk.
I'm not saying that there's no risk, but if you're at a bar in, you know, New York City and you have a question about, you know, or even if you're in a bar in Alabama and you have a question about, you know, why do you think racism is right? It's unlikely that that person is going to kill you for asking a polite question about why they're racist. I mean, unlikely. Like, if anyone has an article of someone who was killed for that, send it to me. I would love to see it posted in the online community. We can discuss it. I don't think that has happened. Now, when people get rude about stuff like that, sure, like then violence can happen. But I don't think a polite question has gotten someone killed, even in places where there's deep-seated anger and frustration and hatred. So that said, you know, when you're Martin Luther King, Yeah,
I
go ahead.
think Sarah Flynn hasn't spoken
Yeah, I know,
yet.
I'm gonna go right there.
And then
just
I
wanna
think
finish
now's
this
the
thought.
time to ask if anybody hasn't spoken yet to raise their hand.
Yep, we'll go to her in just one second. And so I just want to say, like, shoot, I lost my thought. So go ahead, Sarah Flynn.
Sorry, I didn't mean.
Okay.
I was going to say about the question of having conversations with people that are different from you. It's very easy and can be a great learning experience. It's basically your intention when you go into it. If you're intending that person's going to be violent to you, then you've already kind of lost before you've even started. If you go in with the good intention of, hey, I want to know what you have to say, then it's going to be fine because they're going to know that. But I remember one time I was having a conversation with this guy in the gym that was like signing me up, and we like disagreed on like basically everything we were talking about, but I was just listening to his ideas and giving him my opinion on it. We weren't arguing, we weren't fighting, nothing like that. And he was just like, okay, well, we agree to disagree. But I was like, but I didn't really disagree with you. I was just listening to you and hearing what you had to say. And he wasn't used to that. So it's kind of like I've built this memory up for, or not this memory, this muscle, having like, you know, being able to hear people and not respond to it because I'm interested. But that's just my personality. And a lot of people are very closed off, especially if you're on social media. You have a lot of preconceived notions about other people that are not true. And they kind of take you away from reality. When you really deal with people face to face, it's fine. You have a conversation, even if you don't agree, as long as you're respectful, it's okay.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sarah Flynn. And I'm glad that you're such a good listener. I think we need more good listeners in this world. We have too many people that like to talk and not enough that like to listen. And I like the saying, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And so we should be listening twice as much as we talk. I do violate that rule in these events because I'm moderating, but yeah, I do try to listen more often when I'm not moderating an event. So that said, I want to, Aisha, did you want to go?
Yeah, I feel when we use the word polite to talk about racial conversations, I have a physiological reaction to that. I mean, I'm brown. I grew up low income. I teach low income Black and brown kids. I've created, race is a really big thing for my identity. It's something that I've struggled with since I was really young. My family is very racially mixed. And I think it's maybe I don't know why I can't get over the term polite and rude, and the dichotomy between those two. But I think I love, Sarah, I love what you said about intention and whether you go in, like I that rings so true to me. And I think the way that I've cultivated, you know, granted, I've taught in predominantly like 99% communities where it's like 99% Black or it's 99% Hispanic. And it, you know, it can be very, very different when you're in a lot more diverse community or demographic. But one of the ways is by not coming at someone, not being aggressive. And I think when we talk about hot button issues like race or homophobia, or all of the isms that we have in our world, I think it's, you know, that's kind of where that limbic system, that those emotions are leading the response. I think that, you know, you can ask someone why you're racist. You can ask an incredibly self-proclaimed KKK member why they're racist. And the manner in which you ask can really, which I'm talking now and I'm realizing this is your point, Garrett. I'm just realizing that I'm saying your point in a different way. Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better. But I don't think, when I hear polite, I think of like social convention, and it's like, oh, it's rude to say this or it's rude to say that. And I think that's where maybe I lose the honest or genuine piece to it. But really it's the energy with which you meet someone. And like you said, being curious. I think being curious goes a long way. That being said, you know, you talk about someone questioning authentic. I don't know if anyone has seen the show Humans. It was a British show from a while ago. It's got like 4 seasons, and I'm gonna spoil the ending. So if anyone wanted to see that, I'm gonna.
Those are
But
yours, if you don't like spoilers.
so there's, you know, these like robots, but they're human, and there's lots of isms because humans, whether it's about race or gender or religion or religious sect or area, like, or money, like we love putting people in categories and then being like, that category is less than me and I'm bad, you know. And so we do it for lots of reasons. But in the show, it was like this very Martin Luther King nonviolent act where, you know, she ended up dying because people beat her to death, and even though she was polite, and even though she came at it with like an open heart and positive intention. And I think that there's sometimes it's not as an extreme. It's not someone died. Maybe it's something that wouldn't even make a local news in a small town in Alabama. But there are some, you know, I think it's not something to start conversations like this without, I feel like, proper prep or really knowing what you're doing, or really I mean, to the point where learning how to modify your voice and learning how to change your tone, and being really intentional about that, I think is really important. So I support the idea, and I agree with it, but I also with a great amount of caution. I wanted to say other things, but I'll shut up and let other people and listen more.
Thanks, Aisha. I love your that you loved what Sarah said about intention. I did too. And I think that actually covers the things you're talking about tone moderation, et cetera, because if your true intention when you talk to this person is, let me empathize with this human being and understand how they came to the position they're in, rather than being angry at them for that position, then you'll come from a place, they will know, like, people are very good at spotting liars, right? Like they will know if you're being insincere. So you need to really come from a place of true inquiry, you know, a place of, I want to get to know you better. I want to get to know your perspective better. I'm coming in with an open mind. And if you have a better reason to believe what you believe than I do what I believe, I'm going to change my mind. And if we all come in with that open-mindedness, which is the second intention of the Freethinker Institute, and we also come in with the transparency, which is also part of the second intention. We are transparent about our beliefs. We're open-minded to other people's beliefs. We have a two-way street here. Then you're better off. And I think I know, and Aisha, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I know why you have analogy to the word polite when I talk about it with racism. And I think it's because, you know, racism is kind of inherently rude. And let's talk about why is it inherently a little bit rude? Well, you're judging someone in a negative way, usually. Like there also is positive racism. So there's that. But so whether it's positive or negative, you're judging someone for something totally out of their control. And most of the isms and the phobias are all the same thing. You're judging someone for something they have no control over and never did and never will. And how does it make any logical sense to judge someone for something that they have absolutely no control over? It makes no sense. Like it's not logical. But yet you have to come from a place of empathy when this person is racist. They were probably born into a racist family or into a racist society where everybody around them was racist and it's all they knew. And this is just where they're coming from in life and they didn't know anything different. And if you come from like let me understand your perspective. Now, if a racist watches this video and has some other good reason for being racist, let me know. I'm open too. Like I'm open to being wrong. Like maybe I'm wrong about this, but for me, judging someone for something that they absolutely have no control over, it's like hating someone for having brown eyes, right? Why am I going to hate someone for having brown eyes or green eyes or, you know, blue eyes? Doesn't make sense. And so, you know, that's where I would put the isms and the phobias. And some of them are more contestable than others, but we can get into that another night. But that said, I want to let Robert go.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my take on the politeness is that politeness is sometimes used as a way to control people. So when people demand politeness, they could be stopping other people from being their authentic selves, because politeness depends on the culture you're in, right? So if you say, well, be polite, it kind of means follow my rules, right? Or follow the rules that I believe you should be following. So I don't know, that's why I think politeness for me maybe isn't always the best way to go about it. Like for me, back to the question about like friendliness, I would say I'm not always friendly to everyone, but I do try to be respectful, because personally I believe everyone deserves respect regardless of what they say or what they believe. So it might not always be polite, but usually you can tell when someone is trying to be respectful versus when they're just trying to follow the rules. I mean, being polite doesn't always mean being respectful either, right? So yeah, and the other part, if I am arguing with someone about a controversial issue, I often find that people have very personal reasons to believe what they believe, rather than purely logical reasons. So a lot of times after a bit of back and forth, I try to dig deeper to see like what is really behind this kind of philosophy, behind this kind of thinking. And usually there's like an event in their life or just something else that's kind of hidden behind all of the logic and justifications that they use to explain themselves. The other point I want to get back to Shane Marie's question about finding meaningful things in your life. I think it's a very personal thing. So you'd have to ask yourself, like, what is meaningful to you? I don't know if you can necessarily get it from other places. Listening to the stories tonight, I think that's had a very, her story sounded very meaningful for her, and Remco's stories sounded very meaningful for him. But I think if I was in that position, I don't know if what they did would be good for me. So like for me, I really appreciate philosophy. So that's what I try to focus on, and that's where I get meaning in my life. So yeah, and I do really appreciate Remco's story, because I think like you can do all the things you're supposed to do, and then you still end up finding fulfillment in something that maybe you didn't really expect to end up at. So I think that's why like I kind of, when I hear about like planning things out, I kind of shy away from that, because I feel like it's great to have a big goal, but it's also great to have some flexibility there, right? For me, like whenever I plan things out, they never go the way I think. So I just have to try to be flexible and see what opportunities come my way. So yeah, so like I guess I focus on the goal and try not to focus too much on how I will accomplish it. I think there are lots and lots of ways to accomplish a goal. So don't limit yourself with just one way. Be open to whatever comes your way, right? Just focus on the goal and you'll get there. You don't always have to worry necessarily about how exactly you'll get there. That's sort of my thinking on that.
And Robert, as far as like being polite, we may be, I don't want to get into a semantic conversation, but you know, for me, being polite and respectful are more or less the same thing. And when I say being polite and respectful, I don't mean you follow my rules. I mean, I follow your rules, meaning the platinum rule, which is to treat other people the way they want to be treated. So when I say polite, I mean polite according to the person that I'm talking to, not according to, you know, necessarily what I see as polite. Now, mind you, there's a little bit of a nuance there where some people may consider anything that disagrees with their confirmation bias to be rude. And I've definitely met people like that. And, you know, there's a point at which you need to be, you know, you have to ground yourself in reality and say, look, you know, I'm being as polite as I can, but literally nothing. And you also have to be able to detect those people and know not to tread too heavily on their egos, because you know their egos will get bruised at even the slightest disagreement with their confirmation bias. And you know you have to tread very lightly there. So I would say even in those cases, I was thinking there was an exception, but I would say even in those cases, the platinum rule really holds firm that you should be polite according to the person you're talking to, which means starting off more polite than you need to be, and then as you get to know that person better, you learn you can be more honest and you know less polite. And with your really close friends, you don't have to be that polite. I'm sometimes rude with my close friends. Like, you know,
Yeah,
groups.
I just meant that politeness is sometimes used as a way to control people, and that's why sometimes it's not.
Yeah, and I agree.
Not necessarily the best way of presenting it.
I agree with you, Robert, and that's not how I mean it. Again, that's where like Aisha's point about like, you know, as a woman, like hearing politeness can be, you know, sometimes not. So like, I think, you know, I think politeness can be used in different ways. And Aisha, did I mishear you before? No, okay. So I think politeness can be used in different ways. When I say it, I just mean be respectful, be polite, try to empathize with the person you're talking to, have their best interests at heart. And if you are thinking about the other person's best interests when you're speaking with them, and you're coming from a place of compassion and love, which is the fifth intention of the Freethinker Institute, which is to, you know, to have an eagerness to give and receive love, which is, you know, there's something called agape, I think I'm pronouncing that right, this time. In Greek, there are like 8 versions of love, and one is a love for all, you know, sentient beings, or really all humans, I think is what the Greek version was. Buddhism says a love for all sentient beings, but, you know, essentially it's a love for everyone. And I think we can all have a certain sense of like, we're all on this human journey together, and a certain sense of, you know, love and compassion for fellow mankind. And I think if we come at it from a place of that, rather than, you know, I want you to follow my rules and anything you don't do that I want is impolite, like that's not what I mean by polite, right? I mean polite as in like reaching out to someone, you know, in a heartfelt way.
Would you be open to using the word respectful rather than polite/rude kind of?
Yeah, like for me, again, I see them as the same. I see them as synonymous. So like I could say respectful if that seems to resonate. It seems to resonate more with Aisha. I see her nodding. So
yeah, I think every time you explain it, I'm on board.
Right.
But every time I hear the term, even after you've explained it, and I know that we're on the same page, I think that there is a strong enough connotation, like cultural connotation with that term, that it just, even though you see polite and respectful as synonymous, I do not. I think that they can be, but I do not see them as naturally synonymous. Yeah, so I think it's just a terminology, like a semantic question versus an idea issue.
Semantics are my strengths, so I tend to focus on the heart of the issue rather than the semantics of it. So I appreciate the semantic feedback, and I'll take that in. We'll try to change that on the website. That said, David, go ahead.
Regarding politeness, I'm going back to the trick I think that there is with assertion or assertiveness. I think when assertiveness, meaning that you express your opinion, is fine as long as you don't expect anyone to change. I think as soon as you are being assertive with the idea of changing people, then you're, well, for one, you're probably it's probably hopeless most of the time. But secondly, too, unless they're actually asking you, what do you think? Then for sure you can. But I mean, if you're just asserting with the idea of changing because you don't like the fact that they're racist or whatever, I think it's a little bit hopeless. And I also think it's presumptuous because, as you said, I think, Garrett, everyone has a reason for thinking the way they are. And in fact, you know, for instance, a racist person might have been brought up in a racist environment, and their parents and their grandparents and their siblings. So you have to be, the only chance you have of ever changing is not to assume that by being assertive you're going to change them, but just showing them, or at least, you know, just saying your opinion of the matter, and also empathizing with the fact that given the environment they were brought up in, it's very reasonable that they're racist. And I think once they realize you actually kind of accept who they are, even though you yourself don't like racism and aren't racist yourself, but you can see why they are. And, you know, it's almost, you know, it's a hard thing to do when you're dealing with somebody who you really find difficult to accept. But I still think the only way you can be assertive and also be polite, although it's sort of a loaded word tonight, although I don't think normally polite is all that difficult. But I think by being assertive but not expecting somebody to change, you're almost polite by default, or respectful by default, because you're respecting the fact that they shouldn't feel that you wanting to change them against their, not against who they are. You're basically saying you shouldn't be who you are, you should be somebody differently. And I don't think that's gonna work. I only wanted to make one other little point quickly, and that was actually to do with bets. And the people who have apocalyptic visions, who have a negative view of life, I think sometimes overdo the, I know she mentioned, I think she said she was helping at a homeless shelter. I'm not sure if she said a woman's shelter and then a humane society. I mean, that's a lot of negativity for one person to be shouldering. And my advice, I have friends who watch too much news, and I say, all you're doing is torturing yourself, because most of the news you can never do anything about. Plus, a lot of it's slanted to get you the eyeballs to stick to the TV or the laptop screen. Limit how much negativity you see in your life, particularly if you feel things are really negative. Then you gotta try to focus on the more positive aspects. Spend time with friends, enjoy yourself somehow. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And I want to let I will echo your comment about the news. I don't watch the news, and because it's all out of my control, and anything that's important on the news, I'm going to hear about through my friends anyway. So, like we're social media. So, I do follow some social media, and so I'll always hear about the big news that way anyway. So, that's Dwayne, I don't think has spoken. So I want to hear from him if we can jump ahead, because we're almost at the end of our time here.
Sure. I just thinking about politeness still. It depends, in my mind, it depends on the motivation that I have for communicating with this person in the first place. If they're a friend, if it's social interaction, then politeness is just, what I was raised with and what we mutually have developed between the two of us. Some of my best friends, our conversations do not sound polite at all to an outside observer, but they're within the realm that we have developed between ourselves. If it's a conversation with another person that I don't have any vested interest in, talking to a teller or a shopkeeper, or where it's just transactional, then there's, I guess, what I would call normal human politeness, the way my grandfather raised me. But if I'm talking to somebody that I'm trying to convince of something, then somebody who has an opinion that I find sufficiently weird, for lack of a more aggressive term, that I'd like to try and approach it if I can, maybe do something about it. I'm not under the illusion that I'm going to change somebody's mind right now, but I do believe that people, many of them, maybe most, can be swayed by a sufficient amount of acquired evidence over time. And so if I'm making a sales pitch, which is what that boils down to, if I'm making a sales pitch to somebody about a position that they don't hold and they don't recognize, then the politeness part of it is manipulation. Simple as that. If I come at somebody and I'm trying to convince them of something, and the first thing I do is piss them off and send them walking out the door, then I failed in the mission that I've taken on for myself. And so for that, I have no problem if the goal that I have is positive in my worldview, and I'm trying to sell an idea that I think makes my life better, the world's life better, maybe even their life better, then politeness is not then it's my interpretation of their expectation and appreciation of my behavior, because my goal is to keep them there long enough to add as much as I can, a couple more straws to the camel's back of whatever bad idea these guys have, hoping that at some point one straw will finally be enough.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And Darlene also had a good point in the chat. I skimmed it, but I think essentially, if I got you right, Darlene, it's that, if we're being two-faced, being polite but not being honest, that's not a good thing either. And that's where I was saying people are good at sensing liars, right? If you're being, dishonestly polite, then people will see through that most of the time. And certainly eventually they'll see through it one way or the other, because liars do get caught. And so with enough time. And so that's not a good way to go. And that's why I was saying the whole way through that I think it's important to be polite and honest. But if you come from a place of respectful and honest, if you come from a place of respect and respecting who the person is and where they come from, and like trying to understand them in a place of empathy, then I think you'll have way more of an ability to influence, which I think is what you're saying as well, Dwayne. And
that wasn't quite what I was saying.
Go ahead.
I was saying that I think that we should not, because everybody has somebody who has used niceness as an excuse to be two-faced. All of us.
Right.
So, and we can't expect, if we're talking to somebody new, they're a stranger. We can't be like expecting them to assume that we're being genuine. So the only thing we can do is literally state out loud, I hope that you can feel I'm trying to be genuine. That main sentence at the very end is the most important part of my comment.
Got it. Yeah, and I think that you're saying like you want to come from a place of sincerity and honesty and politeness all at the same time. Is that right?
I'm just saying the word hope is incredibly important when you're talking with somebody new.
Right.
And you're trying to ask them, why are you racist? If you're trying to be plain, you're trying to speak plainly with them, then also saying the word, I hope that you can feel I'm trying to be genuine. Like, saying the word hope, it changes it so that way you're not that way they understand that there's not an expectation.
Yeah. So. And I think that not setting the expectation is a great point. And I do kind of need to wind down, guys. I apologize, but I've been up since really early this morning, so I need to peace out around 9 o'clock. So I would love to encourage those that have hands up to continue the conversation in the online community, because we won't have time for everybody's hands tonight, unfortunately. But I do think I hope that everyone enjoyed this as much as I did, or at least half as much as I did, so you enjoyed it a lot. And I appreciate all of your comments and your contributions. Would love to continue to stay in touch with you guys in the online community throughout the week. And I hope to see you next week. Ellis, do you remember what we're doing next week?
Yes, of course. Next week is Herb Cleanser.
Oh, yeah.
It's about universal human development accounts. So we hope to see everyone there.
This is a super cool idea. If I can put a plug in for Herb, he's going to be the presenter, so I won't be speaking too much next week. You can get a break from me. But he's got this concept of like, and he's going to explain it really well, but it's like, basically a fund that helps like support human development in terms of like personal and professional development and growth throughout one's life, that can be funded through various sources. So it's a really cool topic. I love Herb's idea. I'm a huge supporter of it. I'm trying to find ways to help and support him and getting more energy around the idea. If I become a successful entrepreneur, I'll find ways to fund it within my company for employees, because it's a super cool idea. So I hope you guys will come next week to listen to Herb. He's really an amazing guy and has some really good ideas for how to make the world a better place. So would encourage everyone to come next week if you can. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. I'm gonna wind down now and hope to see you all in the online community. Hope everybody has a great night, and thanks again for everyone's contributions.